Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here coming at you from the Knife Center, and today we're taking a look at the best knives that use my favorite locking system on the market. Let's check them out. Now most of you out there are going to be familiar with this type of lock from Benchmade and their Axis lock. Now the reason I wanted to do this video now is other people besides Benchmade are able to make this style of lock, but Benchmade still has the rights to the name Axis. And everyone out there is trying to come up with sort of their own name for their version of the lock. I'm here to put a stop to that nonsense. What we have with this type of lock is a crossbar of steel running through both sides of the handle and it wedges up against the tang. So naturally, this is the crossbar lock. But whatever you want to call it, it is a great lock. And like I said, pretty much my favorite mechanism on the market. And I'm going to tell you why, because there's a few advantages to it, and I'm going to use this Benchmade 940 Osborne to show you. First off, one of those nice little features that's kind of baked into its DNA is that it is ambidextrous. Because you've got that crossbar going through both sides of the handle, either hand can access it just fine, and that means even if you're not a lefty, let's say you're carrying your knife on your offhand side, you can still access it just fine. It still works very intuitively, and you're not going to have any problems using it. Secondly, the style of lock tends to be pretty strong. Because you've got that hardened bar of steel wedged up against that metal of the blade, so long as the handle is strong enough, it's going to hold up pretty well to a lot of kinds of abuse out there. I've actually thrashed really hard on some of mine. Now some folks out there are going to mention the Omega springs, and that's what actually pushes the lock bar forward. Now sometimes they can break on you, but it tends to be pretty rare. I've almost exclusively carried crossbar locking knives for a number of years at this point, and I've only had it happen to me once. But even if that does happen, the second spring is going to be strong enough to still engage the lock while you seek out a replacement. And in a real dire straits emergency, you always could wedge something behind that lock bar if you really had to. But again, it's one of those vanishingly rare symptoms, I think, these days. Some of you out there in the comments I know are going to disagree with me. You've maybe been a little bit unlucky with them, but I have to say these tend to be very reliable. All right, third on the list of advantages of this type of lock is the action and the speed. I'm kind of lumping the two together because it all comes down into the opening and closing action. I'm going to close the blade here. You can hold that lock bar back and simply flick the blade closed. It's nice and free floating, and then you can do the same thing in reverse to open it. It's nice and fast, and times I've found this to be especially useful apart from just general day-to-day. If you're working on something and you need to figure out you need to cut something, you can keep your hand on whatever you're working on, reach into your pocket, flick the blade open, cut what you need to cut, close it, and get it back into your pocket really quickly without ever having to take your hands off of your project. You can keep things nice and stable while you get to your knife. Now all of that's really nice when taken all together, but the thing that really puts this over the top is there's an inherent degree of safety to this style of lock that you just don't see in other locking mechanisms out there. Certainly there's a lot of strong locks out there, but the advantage of the Axis and similar crossbar style locks is your fingers stay out of the path of the blade when you're closing the knife. Because it's not like a liner or a frame lock where you actually have to reach a digit across that path, again, it's just a little extra inherent degree of safety that I always appreciate. But enough about the lock itself, let's talk about this particular knife. Now most folks' first experience with an Axis lock was probably with the Griptilian series from Benchmade, myself included, but I wanted to show kind of the flagship of Benchmade's Axis lock lineup, this 940 Osborne. I've got a 3.4-inch blade here with a reverse tanto shape, and this one uses S30V, but there are some upgraded versions available. And we have a nice milled aluminum handle here that's anodized green. You got that purple backspacer for contrast. The 940 has always been kind of a perfect blend between tactical and gentleman's knives, and it's still going strong today. It's one of their longest running series, and it just isn't going anywhere because it really is a fantastic everyday carry blade. One of my favorite knives that Benchmade offers right now, though, is the new for 2020 Presidio 2. The large size especially I'm a big fan of, but it does come in two different sizes. Now the original Presidios came with an aluminum handle, but I really like the handle material that they've used here. It's their new CF Elite, which CF stands for carbon fiber because this is a carbon fiber reinforced nylon material. It looks almost black on camera, but it is really just a dark graphite. And you even see a little bit of sheen when you move things around in the light. That way it does still maintain kind of low profile with the dark coloration, but it's a little more interesting to look at than just every other black-handled knife on the market. We've also got a nice deep carry pocket clip, which is reversible, maintaining the ambidextrous usability of this knife, and a 3 3/4 or thereabouts inch blade of S30V. Really great blade shape. That's part of the reason I like this so much. It's just simple and overall very usable. Got a high flat grind, a nice swedge along the spine to relieve that point of friction when you're moving through material, and it just feels really good and ready to do some heavy work when you put it in your hand. And of course that axis lock gives it that great action that you know and love. Best part about this, at least right now in 2020, is the price on this model. Pretty reasonable for most Benchmades out there, which do tend to get a little more expensive these days, being made in America and using this type of lock. This one comes in just over 130 bucks, which is a really good deal for what you're getting, I think. And it's certainly a little more affordable than the 940 series, which starts a little bit under 200 these days and then climbs from there depending on which version you get. What's nice about a crossbar lock though is it works across any range of different styles of knives, not just on the modern tactical or fanciful knives. It even works on some more traditional feeling knives, shown here with the Benchmade Crooked River. This is just a classic folding hunter type of shape, of course just updated with the new locking mechanism and some nice materials too. S30V again in this case, and we've got a diamond wood handle, which is a stabilized material. It's not going to shrink or crack in the same way that regular wood can, and it's going to last a long time and look great doing it. Now you can actually get this in two different sizes right now. The large version, or the standard version, comes with a 4-inch blade, plenty of reach there. That comes in just over 220 right now. And they've also got a mini version, which is kind of a misnomer because I think it's kind of a just right size. The blade on that one is about 3.4 inches. In any other nomenclature, that would be kind of the medium size. But that's a great size to carry, and that one comes in about 204. Now the reason it's only been Benchmade making these crossbar style locks for so long is they actually purchased the rights to the patent from Jason Williams and Bill McHenry, who actually invented this lock, and they then gave it the name Axis. That's why now, even though the patent has expired and other folks can now develop it, they still have the rights to that name. But probably the other single company that's really kicking into high gear with the crossbar style lock these days is SOG, or SOG Knives as you may know them. And it really started to be the case with their Terminus XR that was released a little bit ago. Now there are a few things about this Terminus XR design, especially with this version I'm holding here, that made a huge splash when they first debuted. First of all was the price. Up to this point, all we've seen are those Axis locks from Benchmades, and they typically carry a little bit of the Benchmade price premium. But with this knife, they really were the first company that wasn't just a Chinese knockoff doing this lock, that produced a version that was high quality and very affordable too. When it debuted, it was just under 50 bucks, and even right now in 2020, it's only 55. The other thing they did with their version of the crossbar lock, which they're calling XR lock, hence the XR in Terminus XR, is the opening methodology here. We've essentially got 3 ways to open the knife. You can of course pull the lock bar back to flick open and close like you would expect. You've also got those thumb studs there, but they've also got a flipper tab here. Now they're not the first ones to do a flipper on a crossbar style lock, but everyone else who's done it, those have all been discontinued at this point. SOG is probably the first company that's really done it extremely well. Reason for that is it's kind of hard to get the action tuned just right for those of us accustomed to, titanium frame lock flippers with a really nice detent. It's very difficult to do that with the crossbar lock, but they've done a really good job with this Terminus XR. Finally, one more thing that they do that no one else is doing quite the same way yet. As soon as you pull that lock bar back, it's actually pushing part of the blade open just a little bit. That way it overcomes that sort of bias towards closure with the springs here, and it gets that started opening before you've even started to twist your wrist, so it makes it even easier to open when you're ready to go. But apart from that, the Terminus XR is just really great for everyday carry. There's a few different versions. There's a green or a crimson G10 handled version. Those come with a D2 steel blade, which comes in under 3 inches, which can be important for some folks out there if they have a blade length restriction. And it's got a nice flat grind with a stone-washed finish. You can also bump things up a little further if you want more edge retention and some more stainless capabilities. There's a version with an S35 VN blade and a G10 handle with a carbon fiber layer on top, so you get a little bit of a classier look. And that one's still very affordable too for what you get at about $85. Also a deep carry pocket clip to keep things nice and secure when you're carrying. Now they've also done some knives with their XR lock at a bit of a higher price point, including their Seal XR, which is an excellent knife. The Kiku XR is very popular, but probably my favorite right now at least is the Pentagon XR. This comes in a bit more expensive, about $175, but you do get an upgrade in blade steel here to CTS XHP, and the blade especially I really enjoy. It's equally good for tactical as well as EDC types of tasks because you actually have a pretty good edge geometry going on here. It is double beveled, but you don't have a full rear sharpened edge, and that sort of trapezoidal or diamond-shaped cross-section is going to be very good when moving through things. It's essentially like a really large swedge. Now, even though most of it's not sharpened in the rear, they have sharpened just a bit of it here, maybe a quarter inch or so on the tip, right on the back edge there. It's going to make it very good for piercing as well as cutting on the backstroke if you need to. The other thing I really appreciate about this design is the handle shape. It's very neutral, so even larger or smaller hands are going to have no problems here. You've essentially only got one large finger guard, or one large finger groove, I should say, right there. And you got that inherent guard, which is formed by the flipper tab. So it really is going to be very easy to use for just about anyone. So in keeping with the spirit of showing a bunch of different styles of knives, we had EDC and tactical from SOG. Now we've got the everyday gentleman's knife, their new version of their money clip series. This is the Ultra XR. Now there's a few versions, and they are admittedly a bit more pricey than the older versions of these knives that had liner locks and such. Coming in about $125 right now, and you can get the gold or a graphite titanium nitride coating on the sub 3-inch S35 VN blade. It still has their XR crossbar lock, and even though it is a lot thinner and they've actually, the spring design I think is a little bit different than the others, it still rotates that blade open just a little bit when you're ready to go. So you can use that thumb opening to open it more deliberately, or flick it open and be ready to go. But it's a really great little blade shape overall, and it's nice and thin, so the slicing characteristics are going to be very good. You do have a pretty wide pocket clip, which is going to let it carry quite nicely. It's reversible and deep carry, and it's wide enough you can carry, your bills or a few credit cards in there if you're going to use it as your money clip. All right, coming up next is probably my favorite iteration of the crossbar lock that's on the market right now. Now, it's not to say anything bad about these others. I think Benchmade especially is the ones everyone is still gunning for, and SOG's XR lock is fantastic, but my favorite crossbar lock on the market right now comes from Hogue. And this is the Hogue Deka, featuring their crossbar lock, which they're calling the ABLE lock, which stands for Ambidextrous Bar Lock Enhanced. Now, the reason I like this one the best right now personally, again, not that any of the others are bad, there's just something smoother and just a little bit nicer still about the way Hogue is doing it. It's just, there's a precision there that you can just feel as soon as you open it. It's nice and smooth, locks up quite nicely, and of course you've got that great action. And showing up here on the Deka, which is a great little design, that's even better. These are made in the USA, just like the Benchmade, and the prices are pretty fair. You're paying about $140 for these, depending on which version you choose, and the materials you're getting really are top-notch for that price. First of all, you've got G10 handles, whereas some of the other competitors out there might be using some synthetic handles at this price point. You've also got 20 CV on the blade steel, which is really great. You're going to get a good amount of edge retention. The blade itself is nice and thin, so again, it's going to slice very nicely. And you've got a couple of options in terms of shape too. You've got this really useful clip point shape right here. You've also got a more aggressive, kind of modified Wharncliffe type of shape with some compound grinds too, if you need something with a more aggressive point, or you just want the cool factor of those compound grinds. Now, there's not a lot of different Hogue designs out there right now with a crossbar lock, but we know they're developing some stuff coming up here in the near future. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they come up with next, because this Deka has been really, really fantastic so far. All right, next up we're going to go with something that deviates a little bit from the standard crossbar lock formula, and that's with the WE Knife Company Double Helix. Now, you should be able to see pretty quickly what's different, and that's the springs are actually located on the outside of this knife rather than inside the handle. It may look a little funky at first, but they definitely went for style with this. It's not to say it's not going to perform, because it is built really solidly. You've got titanium for the handles, a few different color finishes available with this kind of stone-washed finish, and an S35 VN blade coming in about 3.3 inches right now. Now, prices on these are a little higher, mostly due to the materials and the execution here. This comes in about $285 at this point in time. but it still does all those great crossbar lock things you love. You can flick the blade closed, and where it differs from any other crossbar lock that I know of on the market right now, in addition to locking the blade open, it also locks the blade closed. Until I actually pull that lock bar back, I cannot pull this knife blade open, which can come in really handy, especially if you're carrying this in a bag or for the women out there in your purse, that sort of thing. Even though crossbar locks have a bias towards closure, they can be overcome if things get a little too jostly out there, but that's not going to be the case with this knife. It's a really nice addition to the genre. Now, this is also the first knife we've seen so far that has a finger choil around the pivot. And that's something where these other knives, they tend to keep your index finger a little further away from the edge. Because of this choil here, you can choke right up and get right behind the edge for smaller cuts, or even control that blade itself a little bit better, which is really great because you've got some decent precision here. Blade stock is a little bit thicker, but the hollow grind here keeps it nice and thin behind the edge. And like most WE knives out there, it comes razor sharp. Now, I mentioned affordability earlier when I was talking about the Terminus XR, how most of these knives that have a crossbar lock tend to be a bit more expensive. Well, this next knife really sets the standard for an affordable crossbar lock knife. This is the Gerber Sumo, coming in at a very affordable $37. All right, the first thing I'll do, I'll address the elephant in the room, and that's the blade steel. For those of you that are steel snobs out there, and I do include myself kind of in that categorization sometimes, this isn't a high-end stainless steel. This is 7CR stainless steel. It's not going to hold an edge a super long time, but the reason I really think it deserves to be on this list of the best crossbar lock knives out there right now is that bargain basement price. It comes in very affordable, like I said, and you do get a lot for that price. Now, that steel is going to be a little bit more durable than some of the other budget stainless steels. It does have a slightly higher degree of toughness, and that's really where this knife shines as sort of a cheap beater knife that you don't have to feel guilty about abusing. It's got a nice stone-washed finish on it, so it's going to hide scratches from use as you start to get things scuffed up. You see that on a few of the other knives here so far, but it really makes a lot of sense on this blade. In addition to that, the shape is just very usable. We're almost 4 inches in length, nice broad drop point, full flat grind, so the slicing geometry is quite nice. And then you have actual G10 handles here. They're not just simple injection molded or anything like that. And you can see you've got the gray and black, so you get some cool coloration going on as well. And then the tuning on their crossbar lock, which they're calling the pivot lock, just as good as anything else out there. And I really do mean that. You don't feel like you're sacrificing anything in the action or the build quality on this knife. The only compromise comes in on that blade steel, and that's what you need to do to hit the price point you can hit with this Sumo. All right, these next three I'm getting into are not technically crossbar locks, but I wanted to show them to you anyway because they offer some sort of unique alternatives to the crossbar lock, or I should say some functionality very similar while being designed in a way that didn't infringe on that original Axis lock patent. And the first and foremost is Spyderco's ball bearing lock, shown here on their Manix 2 XL. As you can see, we've still got an access point to that lock on either side of the handle, so that ambidextrous nature is maintained. And it even works in the same way, action-wise, as those crossbar locks, as you can flick it open no problem too. But instead of a crossbar that runs through both sides of the handle, instead, we've actually got a ball bearing that gets pushed into the tang of the blade, and that sits in this cage, essentially, that lets you pull that ball bearing back and forth as you go to operate the lock. It works great, and I think the Manix 2 XL is my favorite Spyderco knife that uses this lock. It's a really great design, and decently priced too for what you're getting, coming in at $154 at this point in time. Blade length is almost 4 inches here, and you get S30V stainless steel. Nice Spyderco edge geometry. You've got that wide leaf-shaped blade with the full flat grind, and of course, an extremely sharp edge right out of the box. You've also got a lot of reach with this knife. Like I said, about a 4-inch blade, good amount of grip with the handle. I do have slightly larger than average hands, as most of you folks out there know, but I still managed to fit my hands in this standard section, or this normal section of the handle itself. But if I needed a little bit more room, or I wanted to control that blade a little bit better out near the tip, you do have that Spyderco's finger choil right there to keep things nice and easy to use. All right, next up is an entry from Artisan Cutlery, and this is the blowback flipper, and it features their recoil lock, which gets a little further away from the crossbar lock in terms of how it looks, but the operation and how you actually use the knife is very similar. Instead of a crossbar, we've essentially got a yoke here running on the back of the handle itself. But pull back on that yoke, you can flick it closed, flip it back open whenever you want. And they've also done a great job of integrating a flipper into this mechanism. The action works good. I will say though, make sure you lift your finger up because it can happen where if you push too hard, you might actually pull that lock bar back a little bit or that locking yoke back just a little bit. So just keep that in mind. Apart from that, you can actually operate this one way that a crossbar lock can't. You can actually use your index finger there to pull right back at the spine and let it start to close that way. These knives come in about $208 right now. You've got a titanium handle and a Damascus blade. And like most artisan Damascus, this is a VG10 based Damascus, so it's not just for looks. You're still gonna get some pretty good performance out of it. Last but not least is the Big Degetta from Lion Steel. And even though this looks more like a standard crossbar lock than that artisan did, it's actually probably the most different here on the table, or at least straying the most from the standard crossbar lock. They call it their TOL lock, which stands for Tactical Operation Lock. And where this really differs, you still do get that crossbar, you still do get access from both sides of the handle, so it's nice and ambidextrous to use. But rather than locking the blade, it's actually locking the back spring in place when the blade is open. So really this is a little bit more like a slip joint than any of the other standard crossbar locks. Now, of course, as a result, you're not going to be able to wrist flick it open like you could with these other knives. Instead, you've got an ambidextrous thumb opener here mounted from the spine of the knife, and it does open the blade nice and easy. Kind of similar to that Pentagon XR from earlier, you've got a really good shape and geometry for both tactical and EDC use. Although if you did want to use this knife for tactical uses, I'd probably say go with that SOG first, because it does have a finger guard, whereas this is a bit more traditional. But we've got D2 steel, a nice flat grind, and a really broad swedge right here. We've also got a fuller on each side of the blade here, which means you could use that essentially as a nail nick to open this two-handed if you wanted to. And in fact, you could remove that thumb opener there from the spine by unscrewing that. Lion Steel, of course, is an Italian company, and as part of the European Union, some of the countries they have to worry about out there don't allow both one-hand opening and locking knives to exist together. So, you know, it's good to have those options out there for the folks that need it. Now, you do have a deep carry pocket clip here on the back, and as you can see, we've got a nice glass breaker pommel. This pocket clip, however, is not ambidextrous, so it's not quite going to maintain the same level of left-hand friendliness as these other designs, but it's still just a fantastic design for EDC with a really nice, clean look. All right, folks, that's all I've got to show you right now for this list of best crossbar locking knives, at least at this point in 2020. Love to know what you thought. Make sure to let us know down in the comments which one of these was your favorites, or if you have another favorite crossbar locking knife out there. In the meantime, if you want to get your hands on any of these knives, we'll leave links in the description that'll take you over to KnifeCenter.com. And while you're there, do sign up for our Knife Rewards program while you're at it, because if you're going to buy one of these cool knives, you might as well earn some free money to spend on your next one. As always, we'd appreciate if you like this video and subscribe to our channel if you're not already. And I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center signing off. See you next time.